Welcome to Revolutionary Gazette. I'm Will. Today, let's make soup. Actually, let's make cheap soup for 6 persons, as is pulled out of the archives of the Society of Cincinnati. Let me read the recipe to you. It's a receipt for cheap soup for 6 persons, published for the use of private soldiers and their families encamped at Cox Heath near Maidstone, 1778. We'll come back to that in a little bit. Take a ½ pound of beef, mutton, or pork and cut it into small pieces, and 3 spoonfuls of split peas. Then take 3 quarts and 1 pint of water and put it into the pot or saucepan and put in the meat that is cut into pieces and the peas and let them boil. Then put in 3 turnips, 3 Jerusalem artichokes, 3 potatoes, 1 onion, and some celery that have all been cut into small pieces. Boil them over a very slow fire for 3 hours. Then thicken the soup with ½ pint of oatmeal, or ½ pound of flour, or ground rice, and let it boil ½ an hour after thickening is put in, stirring it half the time. Then season with salt and pepper to taste. Okay, so there's the recipe. My friend Hayden has come in today, and we're going to go ahead and make it. I was pretty excited when I read it to try it, but then I had a concern. Maidstone, 1778. This is British militia in England gathering to be ready for a potential French invasion, which never came. It gives us a chance to stop and look at the larger world for Great Britain. They're dealing with more than just these rebellious colonies at the time. I shared my trepidation of doing this with John U. Reese, a historian, author, researcher, and a supporter of Revolutionary Gazette. He sent me a message back and said, "Will, do it anyway. This is a great way to look at how food was supposed to be made by soldiers in the army, minus a few items in the recipe which weren't as common in America." So let's look at our soup today. Hayden and I have laid out here 3 things that probably came from the ration. A ½ pound of meat, and we left the bone in, partially because later in the recipe it does say how the bone will help the stew, partially because you're not going to get the pretty cut of meat all the time when you're a soldier in the field. You're going to get what you're handed, and that probably involves some of the bone. 3 spoonfuls of split dried peas, and about a ½ pound of flour, which we'll get to later. Now, the soup doesn't just come from the ration. You'd better find some stuff in a farmer's field nearby to represent that. We have 3 small potatoes, 3 turnips, and an onion. First, we'll cut everything up and we'll get the meat, the bone, and the peas in the pot and get that to boil. We'll keep cutting up the small pieces and we'll get them turned in. Let's get going. Let's see how this soup tastes. Well, the fire is coming up, and we've got the meat cut into small pieces. We've got the peas ready to go in. So in order for this stew to first bring the meat and the peas to a boil, and to cut it back, and it says use a very slow fire. Slow fire in what you would think of means a simmer. So we first need to get up to a boil and then bring it back to a simmer. We're going to keep cutting the vegetables up, and they'll go in after we make a boil. So let's get this going here. Hayden, if you want to grab some of that meat. Yep. And we'll get the bone in. And then the last piece for now is the peas. So, ½ pound of meat, the bone, and the peas. We'll get this coming up to a boil, build the fire around it, keep cutting it up, and we'll come back and visit you in a little while. See you in a bit. Okay, so we got that boil that the recipe said. The peas and the beef have started to boil. We now need to back it down to a slow fire. Remember, we're going to define a slow fire as a simmer. And as we do that, we're going to add all of our vegetables. For us today, that is potatoes, that is turnips, and that is an onion. We'll get that in, back it off, and let it go for 3 hours, and we'll see you back in a little bit. Well, we're about an hour and a half in, and we're working hard to keep this to just a slow fire. Hayden and I were just talking, and we said it's interesting. We haven't seen the vegetables break down quite as much as we thought they were going to, but while we're waiting, there's 2 more parts to the recipe that I want to read to you. Things that, because we're doing a soldier soup, we're not going to honor today, but something for you to consider if you want to make this soup at home, and then a good piece of historic knowledge. So the recipe continues to say, pounded ginger and allspice may be used occasionally in the seasoning. Also thyme, onions, garlic, rocambole, savory, and almost any sort of garden stuff or pot herbs, provided they are cut small. For they will dissolve in the soup while it is stewing, and if the bones are chopped small and boiled in the soup, it will much improve it. Now remember, we said, hey, soldiers are going to get whatever they're handed. We had a piece of bone with our meat. Yeah, that's in there. This will not cost more than a penny for each person for a good meal. So that's great. We want to keep it just as low expense as we can in the military. It has to be economical. The recipe has one more piece, and that's an NB piece. Okay, in 18th century text, if you look very much, you're going to see N period, B period. It stands for nota bene. Great, doesn't sound English. It's not, it's Latin. Nota bene means note well. This is a piece of emphasis. You'll find it here, you find it in the drill manuals, something to pay attention to. In our case, the NB in this section. The chief art in preparing these cheap foods is to cut the ingredients small and stew them a considerable time over a slow fire, and thus almost all sorts of meat and garden stuff will dissolve, and when properly seasoned will become a wholesome and pleasant food and will serve very well at the tables of the rich as well as the poor. So the NB here gives some notes and says this is going to be a good soup for just about everybody. We've got an hour and a half to go before we add the thickener. We'll be back in a while. All right, well, 3 hours has passed, and I can tell you this is cooking down really well. The thing, Hayden, I've noticed, we've had a hard time keeping the fire slow enough. The work hasn't been to keep it boiling. It has been to keep it down to a simmer. And so we've been adjusting, keeping enough flame going, but keeping it away enough. So after the 3 hours, we want to thicken the soup. We're going to do that. Of course, remember the recipe said oatmeal or flour or ground rice. We think most common to the American soldier in the Revolutionary War is going to be the flour. So we have ½ pound of flour, and we're not using this to make dumplings or otherwise. It's a thickener. So we're going to put it in and then let it go and simmer further for another half an hour, and we're going to stir it half the time. That means pretty constantly keep it going. We don't want this to scorch. We don't want this to burn. We've worked on the soup for hours. Rations are scarce. We've got to take care of it. So in the flour goes, and time to begin stirring. All right, well, we're stirring in a half an hour, letting the flour thicken. There is a world in the modern world where people would say, hey, pull some of the fluid out and mix the flour in with that and make a roux. We're not sure that that really fits with the knowledge of the American soldier to cooking initially, so we did it this way. The other thing we're going to do is we're going to add the salt and pepper now to let it stir in and stew in as it goes. So a little bit of salt, a little bit of pepper, and away we go. We'll keep going for a half an hour and be back with you directly. Well, we're back, and we've stirred regularly through the half an hour of the thickener, and of course we added the salt and pepper, tons of other spices. Remember, we read some of those other things. We don't think that fits a soldier's existence, but if you want to try the soup other ways, it should be really delicious. For now, let's see what it was like. All right. Well. Okay, Hayden.
Yeah. Ladle me some soup, sir.
Okay, I don't want to pour it on your wallet. And we don't want to waste it.
No.
There you go. And I think I'm just...
The working spoon.
I don't see much of another choice.
Yeah.
Only so much stuff in hand.
It's actually a lot better than I thought it was going to be.
Yeah, it's really good. It's simple. The peas still have a lot of structure. I'm surprised.
Yeah.
And I know we were talking earlier, you said if we were going to do it again, maybe soak the peas. Mm-hmm. Something you might learn by common experience, but definitely not something that was mentioned in this recipe. Well, folks, Just a couple simple ingredients, and here you go. You've got a cheap soup for 6 persons, and man, if you split that up amongst 6, it's going to be really full people. So, well, thanks for spending your time with Revolutionary Gazette. Hayden and I are going to turn here to eating a meal and relaxing some time together around the fire. Hope you find a way to connect with history. Give this a try. It might help you. We'll see you again soon.